if we talk about sleep and anabolic steroids, like you and I both have heard people saying like, "Hey, my sleep got worse."
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I only hear that from people that use large amounts of steroids, but not with TRT. Like people on TRT, they generally say, "Hey, my sleep improved."
Yeah.
But people that use anabolics say my sleep is a little bit worse, and especially if they use certain products like Trembolone,
Yeah, for sure.
the sleep worsens a lot. And and I think if you look at the studies, we see a lot of evidence that sleep with anabolic steroid users gets worse. So people feel less rested in daytime. They have like excessive daytime sleepiness. They have shorter sleeping durations. But these are all studies done on just asking people, like, "Hey, you use anabolic steroids?" Yes. What do you notice of your sleep? Oh, it gets worse. We've never really measured it until like 5 years ago. And I would like to talk about that study.
Okay.
But before I do, I would like to talk about like what is quality of sleep. And generally, we're then interested in how long people sleep, but we are also interested in what is the actual quality of the sleep that we have. And generally, what people are then interested in how long is someone awake before they get off bed. So people sleep, they wake up for a certain period, and this can happen again, and then they sleep again, and this can happen again and again. So that is one of the markers we're looking at for sleep quality, but also the amount of sleep apneas people have. And this is generally measured per hour. And what are sleep apneas? This is like a temporary, like a cessation of breathing, where people stop breathing, and then after a while, it kicks in again, and they start doing their rhythmic breathing again. We all do this. If you're healthy or unhealthy, we all have apneas in our sleep. But the amount of apneas we have per hour and how long these apneas are, these sleeping stops, that determines if there's really something going on and if we experience negative consequences of that. So the moment you stop breathing during your sleep, our oxygen lowers because we're not breathing in oxygen anymore, but also CO2, which is the general like exhaust product of our body. We breathe that out. That heightens in our blood. So at a certain moment when you stop breathing, oxygen lowers in your blood, lowers in your blood. CO2 rises, and at a certain moment, your certain receptors in your brainstem, they will recognize that these values are changing, and your body doesn't want it to go below a certain level, because if your oxygen gets too low, this can damage tissues. If your CET gets too low, that can be toxic. So at a certain moment, certain receptors in your brain will recognize these changing values, and then automatically we kick in the breathing rhythm again. And we say if you have apneas that are longer than 10 seconds, so you hold your breath for 10 seconds, and more than 5 times per hour, and but as a byproduct, you also experience like tiredness during the day,
Yeah.
then we call this sleep apnea
Yeah,
syndrome.
there's that whole acronym we learned at med school. I think it's like stop bang or something like that.
Ah,
Your risk factors or part of the diagnostic criteria for sleep apnea. But yeah, it included what you mentioned.
yeah. And so if we have sleep apnea syndrome, this can lead to high blood pressure, this can lead to cognitive problems, this can lead to cardiovascular concerns in the future, but also other serious health problems. So good sleep quality is of utmost importance. And if we have sleep apnea, these can be divided into two different kinds. This can be obstructive. That means that somewhere in your throat or in your mouth, there is something that pushes on the windpipe or makes the windpipe smaller, which makes breathing heavier or more difficult, which has an inclination for more and longer apneas. Or this can be a central problem, a central meaning coming from your brain, the organ that instructs the lungs and the muscles around the lungs to contract or to relax for your breathing to occur. And we know that especially body weight of both the neck and the chest have a negative relation to sleep quality. And you can imagine, like, the moment you're a big bodybuilder or you're muscled in general, the neck becomes thicker, the muscles around the neck becomes thicker, and they press on the windpipe. And it's the same with the chest. If you have a lot of chest muscle or maybe chest fat, that makes it harder to breathe up because there's just more mass on it. So that is what we know. So generally, bodybuilders are people that are just heavier, whether it's muscle or fat, especially both, have a higher risk for sleeping problems or sleep apnea. How do you know that? Well, generally, people that have sleep apnea, they don't experience themselves, but their partners know. And
Yeah.
I bet there are people watching now that know, oh yeah, my spouse tells me, hey, you're making some weird noises, and sometimes your breathing just falls flat, and I'm a little bit concerned. Or they say, man, you have some excessive snoring going on. To be honest, to be clear, excessive snoring or snoring in general is not the same as apnea, but they can be correlated. So if we then look at anabolics and testosterone and apnea, we see that if someone wants to be eligible, for someone to be eligible for testosterone replacement therapy, they generally don't do that with people that have apnea or at least untreated apneas. Because there are some studies that show that sleep apnea worsens the moment people start using testosterone replacement therapy. And what do we see then? People had lower oxygen saturations during their sleep. And also the severity of these lower oxygen saturations is how long the duration of it is also more severe. And this effect seems to be immediate, but over time it alleviates. And the theory is this: that generally that people that use TRT are older men. They have higher body fat percentages. And the moment they start using testosterone, their testosterone levels increase, which reduces their body weight. And this makes breathing easier, like I said earlier. So TRT seems to worsen sleep quality, but that is alleviated over time when the body weight is being reduced. A fun fact is also, we know that sleep apnea syndrome can also lower testosterone, because we know that it can, because of the toxic effects of high CO2 or the toxic effect of low O2, of low oxygen in your brain, can actually disrupt testosterone production at the level of the brain. And besides that, being obese also heightens the chance of sleep apnea,
Yeah.
which also reduces testosterone levels. So, conclusion: being fat or being higher weight is just bad for sleep in general.
Yeah. So
Um,
a question would be, so it appears that there are, well, the effects of sleep apnea appear to be more chronic, or like the cause of it seems to be more chronic, because obviously if you're a heavy bodybuilder, you're not gonna, as soon as you take steroids, you're not immediately heavier. However,
mhm.
um, are there acute effects of steroids on your sleep and sleep apnea? Because I do hear people saying as soon as they took the steroid,
Mhm.
they experienced more snoring or something like along those lines, which might be related to sleep apnea. So is there
Yeah.
something else that's going on besides just the body mass or body weight of the individual?
Yeah, I hear that too. And you're absolutely right by saying increases in body weight or in muscle mass is probably unlikely to cause these acute effects, but there are some other mechanisms involved. And one of the things that is at play that we know from studies is probably the case is that the high amount of androgens and the high amount of estrogen as well actually causes these receptors in your brainstem that measure oxygen and that measure carbon dioxide, CO2, they get changed. The threshold gets changed. So imagine this: you have an apnea during your sleep, your oxygen goes down and down and down, and your normal, let's say, normal oxygen level is 100%, maybe 89%. And during sleep, during an apnea, it goes down and goes all the way down to 90. And let's say the 90% oxygen is the threshold for these receptors to kick in and start the breathing pattern again. But what we see with people that use anabolic steroids or use high amount of testosterone is that this threshold gets lowered, which means it takes a longer period of time before you start breathing again. And it doesn't go to 90%, but it even dips to maybe 87% or like 85%. So this can be one of the things that make people feel their sleep is worsened, their quality of sleep is worsened. And also it seems that the frequency of apneas increase as well. And this has probably to do with the same mechanism as well. So this is a central effect. Another thing that we can think of is in some cycles, the amount of fluid retention increases. Fluid retention also occurs around the muscles or the skin around your throat, which can also make breathing a little bit harder, which has an inclination for more apneas and worse sleep patterns. And this might be elevated maybe with something like telmisartan to lower the amount of fluid in the body. Besides that, there's probably a third factor as well that is probably important to say is with one of the studies with anabolic steroid users looking at sleep quality, they compared it to people that also did heavy weight training but didn't use anabolic steroids. And that makes it possible to determine, are there any effects on sleep quality by just weight training alone? And that seems to be the case as well. So more intense workouts can also decrease sleep, especially if you train in the evening. Then that can retain a little bit when you want to sleep, makes you sleep lighter. So that is another thing. Cardio doesn't seem to have this effect, but weight training does. And another, or maybe the last point that we can think of as well, is the anabolic steroids heighten the activity levels of our body. We are more awake, we are more active. This is an adrenogenic function that seems to be elevated. And this might probably influence our sleep quality as well. And maybe to add in another thing is the use of stimulants. So if you train in the evening and you use caffeine or another pre-workout, and we see that a lot with people that use anabolic steroids, that can also negatively influence the sleep quality as well.
Interesting. So, what would you suggest then for an individual who seems like they're struggling from sleep apnea? What would you do? Let's make it difficult, and they're not willing to lose weight because they're a professional bodybuilder, but they're scared of the risks that sleep apnea have given or perhaps are giving them. So, what would you do in that scenario?
We start with sleep quality, like whether you're fat or big or thin or skinny, sleep quality comes first. So that means no more screens 2-3 hours before you sleep, maybe 2 hours before you sleep, no more screens. Sleep on your side, not on your chest or your back. No alcohol. Alcohol relaxes the musculature around your throat, which doesn't help as well. Some people have daily naps or naps during the afternoon. Generally, I would say keep them short, not too long, because otherwise it can diminish the need of sleep later on the day. And make sure the room you're sleeping in is not too warm or too cold. Generally, a little bit on the colder side of things, especially colder than you would do in your normal living room, for example. And make sure it has good ventilation so there's some fresh air coming in. So that is what we can do, just sleep hygiene, sleep quality. Besides that, there are several interventions we can think of. You can use a snoring mouthpiece, which can be put into a mouth, which is more like a plastic brace, which tilts your jaw a little bit, which makes breathing easier. That is something you can just buy and position yourself. Um, those would be the first things you can do. If we look at on the anabolic steroid side, I would generally try to not use um, exotic anabolics that have a negative influence on sleep. We know they have a negative influence on their sleep. Generally, this is trenbolone, and in a lesser degree with the nandrolones as well, like NPP and decadurabolin. Um, that would probably be in start. And if you want to go even further, let's say all of these things don't help, and you're still having bad sleep quality. Well, then I think it's time for to contact a medical professional to look at this, or maybe go to your GP to look for more advanced ways to combat this. Because the if if you really have apnea syndrome, sleep apnea syndrome, the what I hear from my clients, the moment they do something about it, the moment they go through the doctor, they get the test done, the sleeping test done, and they get, for example, a positive airway pressure apparatus like a CPAP or a BiPAP, um, their quality of life changes night and day. And I think what I hear from talks with people is that they just didn't know that their life can be so good or way better. Because most people, because as you said earlier, like the lower sleep quality is a thing over years. If people are a little bit overweight, if people have a lot of muscle mass and they sleep bad, it's probably a thing of years. So they get slowly adjusted to being this kind of tired. They slowly get adjusted to waking up shitty like this. So then the first night they get on the CPAP, it's it's uh, it's a great experience. What I hear from people, and I experience myself as well within my family, people using an apparatus like this, and they life quality went up greatly. Yeah.
Yeah.
One last thing, in some cases, um, due to genetics, the anatomy of the nose or of the mouth is altered, which makes a passage of air a little bit harder. Um, that needs to be diagnosed by a doctor, and then a ENT needs to be looked at, and sometimes with surgery things can be fixed. But this is a small subset of people that actually have an anatomical um, how do you call it, deficiency
Yeah.
in their airflow. Yeah.
I'm sure I fall under that because I have well, this is like a very personal topic to me because I've
Mm.
struggled. I've never been diagnosed with sleep apnea, but I'm sure my girlfriend can say I have sleep apnea.
Yeah.
Because I just snore ridiculously loudly, and well, I mean, I used to, especially when I was around 120 kgs.
Mm. Mm.
And the funny thing is, around that time, I was like, I think MK677 was like a big craze here. And I was like, you know
Mm.
what? I want amazing quality sleep because my sleep is terrible. And that just made it way worse. And it's the worst drug
Mm.
that I could have ever used for sleep. And I'm not the only one who's had this experience with MK677. That water retention is ridiculous. And
Mhm.
you snore and you sound like a water buffalo. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, that's because you're not talking about something that increases your growth hormone,
Yeah.
and um, yeah, generally people say their sleep quality actually increases, but you didn't have that experience, huh?
No, not at all. I
No.
just, but I remember we were away on holiday and everyone said they could hear me snoring. Um, so, and I
Yeah,
kept waking up extremely tired. And as soon as that happened, I decided I needed to lose weight. And it's definitely improved. So, weight
yeah,
reduction was the biggest thing, but also
yeah,
eliminating
absolutely.
MK677. That water retention was ridiculous. And it seems to be worse if you're already quite a hefty person. I was already
Mm.
around 110 then,
Mm.
so which was like not lean 110, so it made it a lot worse. And I've realized with clients who are already quite lean, it doesn't seem to impact their ability to sleep negatively. It seems to have a positive
Mhm.
benefit. But for individuals who are already quite heavy, MK677 just makes your sleep
Mm.
quality worse. But that also is just a personal experience of mine.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. And now it's better, you say?
Yeah, much better. I'm much lighter than I used to be, but I still snore from time to time. I've considered a CPAP, but we'll
Yeah,
see. I mean, I don't have any of the other criteria, but it's just the very disgruntled noises I make when I sleep.
I see. I see. Have you ever thought of using a mandibular repositioning piece?
I actually haven't done too much research into it because I've obviously when when you're in the health field you don't want anything to be wrong with you. So I was just saying, nah,
Okay.
just snore and it's not causing problems. But I mean, I probably should seek help because I wake up tired. So I'm definitely going to look into that, see how that
Fair enough.
improves things, and then I'll probably document it because it's a big
Mm,
issue that a lot of people have. And I mean, I'm not the heaviest right now, and I'm still struggling from it. So it's quite a pertinent issue.
I see. I see. Yeah, I'm curious to any results, and if you do a sleep test, that would be really interesting
Yeah.
to delve into. Yeah, there's one last thing I would like to say about this. Like, in some cases, my clients they're requesting me like, "Hey, are there any medications that can help me with sleep?" And to be honest, sure, there's a lot of medications that make you go to sleep, but the question is it really good sleep and stuff like that. So generally, I say no. That is really an unwise thing to do because some of these sleep medications are highly addictive, and then you get into a whole different problem. Um, and it absolutely doesn't address the core issue. So it probably is going to get worse. You'll need more drugs to fall asleep or to keep being asleep, and it's not a good corner to be in with. So generally, pretty much always I tell people no, medication is not a solution for your sleeping problems. Yeah.